Hey guys, BJTHEBRAVE here, back with some more Warpforge content, and today I'm going to be doing a full faction card review for the Adepta Sororitas. Obviously, those been following the channel, I did do this when the Sisters of Battle got released, but there's been nerfs, there's been buffs, and quite frankly I've just had more time to obviously play with them, so I wanted to kind of do a full tier list of where I kind of see the cards at the minute. So let me know in the comments what you think as we go along, any of the cards that you kind of disagree with or agree with. Or any any other comments. I always love reading the comments and interacting with you guys. So yeah, and of course like and subscribe and all that jazz. Let's dive on in. So for anyone who doesn't know, I tend to review cards on a 1 to 5 star basis. Everything from 1 being unplayable up to 5 stars being those kind of like really must have S tier cards. Generally I always say, like, when you're making up really good decks, they should be mainly made up of like 4 and 5 star cards, although you will definitely, depending on the style of the deck and the archetype, you will definitely include probably some 3-star cards and potentially even a 2-star card, but the majority should be made up of the 4s and 5s ideally. So I hope this really helps with your kind of collecting, particular if you are just diving into the Adepta Sororitas, and helping you to understand like which order to craft things, etc, etc. Alright, so let's go for it. So first of all, let's talk about the unplayable cards in the faction. For me, the Shrine World is unplayable. Sadly, it really pains me, this one, guys, because I really want this card to be good. I have done one deck where one copy of Shrine World worked quite well for me. Really used as a kind of last resource once I've spent all my resources, and when you're playing against things like necrons, you're running out of resources and then you play it, and it's kind of okay in that type of build. But I just think this card can be better. I don't think it's quite there yet. I don't think it justifies its slot in 99% of Sisters decks, to be honest. And so yeah, it's unfortunately pretty unplayable. The Defenders of the Faith also pretty unplayable. There are maybe 1 or 2 ridiculous combos that you won't get off often with this card, but the problem is that what you're doing is you're creating a sister for every enemy unit, but the problem is that that's not particularly effective. They don't do anything on the turn they come down, then the next turn, if you want to pray with them, they don't attack again. So it's kind of like just 6 mana doing nothing really to the current board state, which, as we know in Warpforge, that is not a good thing. The Imperial Creed, again, stun 3 units, refill 3, but you need 8. You need a ridiculous amount of faith for that to work. So again, I just find this card to be pretty unplayable. Fiery Conviction is a confused card. It's like a finisher because it gives everyone +2 to the melee attack, which sounds good. But then it says heal 3 2 units. You don't really need that heal 3, do you? If you've got the 5 faith payoff. It doesn't really make sense. Those two things don't seem to go together really to me. It seems like the most confused card in the faction. I'd kind of like to see this card reworked. Next up, we got Furious Reprisal. This is one of those cards where when you look at it, at first glance, it seems pretty good. It says give flank to a friendly troop. And then this one says if that troop is damaged, give it blast 3. So obviously if you're playing this in a Morven deck, it might be a little bit better. Potentially this is like a 2-star card if you were analysing it through just purely through Morven, just because she can ping it and give it the blast. But I think that this card is one of those cards where when you actually build the deck and you actually are looking for those combos, it's just a bit too much of a fantasy, to be honest, and you're never going to fit this into the decks anywhere. I don't think it'll end up being that functional. So yeah, overall I find this to be unplayable. Sadly, I'm also putting the Exorcist in this category. The Exorcist has got loads of potential. I have a feeling it's going to get buffed. I hope so, because me and the rest of the community have gone on about it forever now, that this card can be really good by just basically scaling the AoE damage ability. So if it was at the minute, you have to have 8 faith to do 4 damage. If you don't have 8 faith, it's a useless card. It's a big waste of tenor. You can't play this card. So you have to have the 8 faith, and it's really difficult to guarantee that every game. If we had to scaling amount, like, you know, if you've got 4 faith, it does some damage. Maybe it does 2 AoE. If you have 6 faith, maybe it does 3 AoE. That kind of thing. This card would be awesome. I would love to play it. It'd be one of my favourite 10 drops in the game. And I still think it'd be reasonable if you did that. I don't think it'd be particularly broken or anything. But right now, as it is, unfortunately, it's unplayable. The Immolator, also unplayable, another big unit. It's got a strange prey ability because it already does blast 2 anyway. So, like, taking the turn off from swinging to do 3 AoE, it doesn't make... It's another bit of a confused card as far as I can see. I don't really understand how you're supposed to use this. It's also not got that great stats. I mean, the health's decent with the armor, but the other stats are not good for 8 energy. The Celestian Superior is an unplayable card. Whilst this card has some decent stats, it will never get to use them because apparently the ability wants you to pray with this card. But why would you pray with something that has these stats, right? Especially late in the game where you need to be swinging. So I'd really love to see this reworked a little bit. Perhaps it says something like Faith 5, deploy a Celestian or something like that. But right now it's unplayable. Already said the Battle Sister's really unplayable. You know, for 2 energy. I think this card is... I don't know, I almost feel like the Battle Sister should automatically, almost like her rally should be to go into prayer straight away. I don't know if that'd be too strong or not, but currently it's unplayable. And I also think Junith is pretty unplayable as well. The main thing that makes Junith unplayable at the minute, though, if I'm being honest, is she's the weakest Warlord, but it's the offense card. The offense card making everything -1 health makes Junith pretty unplayable. And until they fix that card, I can't see that changing. Alright, so that's the 1-drops. If you're liking it so far, please like the video, and let's move on to the 2-drops. Sorry, not 2-drops, 2 stars. So these cards are 2 out of 5. I call them bad. I think ultimately they're flawed. They can have some nice things about them, but ultimately they're flawed. The Moment of Grace reminds me of the Adrenal Surge from the Tunings. +2/+2. It's hard to make that unplayable because... and actually in beginner decks, I think you could play this card, because what it does is it allows you, it's another way to compete in the early game. The problem is the sisters are really supposed to be trying to pray and kind of gain faith points in the early game, so it's a bit confusing in that sense. The other thing is that, you know, ultimately the Tunings can play their Adrenal Surge on a Synapse creature, meaning that 2 to 3 units, including the Warlord, get that buff, which is much, much better value for 2E. No such thing here, right? So you're not getting that great value for the 2 energy, if I'm honest. The Inspiring Oratory, another card that it just doesn't seem to work in practice. It looks pretty tempting, give Shield and Vanguard to a unit. I want to play more, I want to test this more, I want to try and find a deck, but when the big units in the faction are not particularly viable at the minute and not being used, kind of makes this card seem pointless. You're only going to play this card if you've got a big beefy unit to play it on. If they make the buffs that we talked about to the Exorcist, the Immolator, and potentially the Canoness, then I could see this card getting better. The Triumph of St. Catherine is not a bad legendary. No, it is a bad legendary. Overall, I don't know how to word this. This is one of those where I'm sure some people think that this is a 3-star card. For me, I just think that you are deploying something that costs 9 energy, that has decent stats. However... it's nice that your Warlord can obviously pray and get 1 armor, but I feel like it is too slow. You don't want to be praying with St. Catherine, although her ability is pretty powerful, to be fair. It might be close to being an ability that an expensive unit could get away with not swinging and actually praying on, because if you're playing her with big units and then you get to play them for free for 0 energy, it could be worth it. But the biggest reason why she's here is she's just too slow, guys. She's just too slow. I'd actually like to see her give heal 3 to a Warlord on deploy, just to really cement the fact that she's like the defensive legendary. I think that'd be pretty cool. The Simulacrum Celestium. This card's a bit of a trap, guys. I know a few people like this card because they think, oh, you know, the Warlord gets permanent buff. But again, the problem is that when you're playing a card like this that does nothing on the turn it comes down and actually has decent stats, you need to be able to use those stats. And if you're praying with it, then it's not actually trading. So I think it's a bit of a flawed card. Don't particularly like it. I can't see it being in most decks. The Imagifier actually has quite a good ability, which is Pray Give Flank to another troop. That's pretty powerful. However, you're never going to get to use it because you drop this on 5 energy. It has poor stats and it's going to get taken out very easily at this point in the game. And so you're never ever going to get to use the flank. Obviously, if it had a way of sticking somehow, I'm not sure how. I don't want to. I don't really want to make this this review about my idea for improvements. To be honest, it's more about reviewing the cards as they are. So I'll just shut up and say I actually think it's a bad card. Now the Canoness is also not quite there. Canoness has potential to be like the kind of decent statted mid-game sticky unit, almost the Carnifex of the faction, but it's not quite there at the minute. I think the armor needs to be the cheaper option, to be honest. But as it currently is, I think it's overall not quite a 3-star. It's a bad card. Sister Superior, similar thing. Stats are kind of evenly spread, which is nice, but it does nothing on the turn it comes down. And even if you do sacrifice and just pray, dealing 1 damage, is that really worth not swinging for 4 damage? I don't think so. I think the Sister Superior is a poor card, and the Hospitalia is also not great because it comes down 4 energy, only has 4 health. Because it has poor range attack with 2, it's very, very easy to trick the trade on this and can die. Now, obviously, this card, running like one of these in a sort of big unit deck could be good, or a deck with lots of Vanguard could be good, because obviously then you can kind of use it to keep healing the unit. But that hasn't emerged yet as a strategy, so right now I would say it's a bad card. Sadly, the Sister Repentia is also pretty bad. It's a card I did try quite a bit after the buff that it got, and it sort of in theory could be good, but in reality, in practice, what I found is that it's one of those cards that does make your opponent react. Like, they will feel the pressure to deal with it, but dealing with it is easy because it has 0 range attack, and if your opponent takes it out on the range attack trade, you've actually lost the tempo now. They're massively ahead on board, so it's almost like a bit of a trap card, I think. The Dominion is a card that I need to play a little bit more with. I think these are the old stats, actually. I've taken these card arts from the EG website. EG, if you're listening, you need to update those tier lists on the site. It's a great feature that they showed. They have the cards there, but I think they're using the old ones. So this guy actually has 4 health now. But I still don't think this card is... Some people actually are saying it's one of the better 3-drops. It just doesn't scale well into the late game, and... I don't think it's particularly great, to be honest. Now, the Death Cult Assassin, these next two, I'm on the fence of. Like the Death Cult Assassin and the Sister Novitate, I could be swayed to saying that these cards are 3 stars. I'm putting them as 2. I think the Death Cult Assassin is okay in the sense that, like, yeah, obviously you're going to trick the trade and kill the range attack of that card, but it does deal 2 damage every time you do that. And because it's got the camouflage, they can't use spells, so it tends to mean that you could well trigger the Penitence twice quite easily. So the Death Cult Assassin is alright, but it is just alright. It's not overwhelming, even though you get to do that, and it doesn't scale well again into the late game. It's a problem with quite a few of the early cards in the Sisters. There's no ability to scale. Oh well, there's a couple that do scale very well. We'll come on to those, but this one doesn't. And the Sister Novitate has a great ability. I've had some games where this card has almost won the game and sort of run away with it. The only thing I'd say is, like, it's like a prey engine, right? So by creating more Sisters, it doesn't necessarily help you trade the board. I almost wish that this thing did like 1 damage as well on the prey, because at the minute gaining an extra 1 of these on the board is essentially just giving you extra faith. So it's like a prey engine, but it's not really doing much in terms of trading in the board. It's a nice 1-drop. It's a nice 1-drop. It potentially should be 3 stars, but I just find that the overall impact of it's not that great, and it's quite easy to take out anyway, so it often doesn't get the bonus. But if you're going for a particularly fast early curve, and if we ever get Junith being decent, then maybe this card will go up to 3 stars. But currently I've got it in 2. Alright, so next up we have got the Conviction of Faith. So this card is a very powerful effect, actually. All friendly units getting 2, because that includes your Warlord, right? So getting 2 armor and then also you know, healing for 2, and that lasting right until your next turn. This is actually a very powerful card. It's definitely a stratagem you want to have in some decks, and you want I want to use more. The reason why it is in situational though for me is just that you know, the amount of times you can have a really worthwhile board state for playing this rather than developing the board is not, it's not super common. So yeah, I still stand by it. I still think situational is right for this card. If we start to see again more Junith player, more go wide decks getting good, then this card could easily become a 4. But right now I think it's in the kind of 3-star range. Now Miraculous Feat is also in there for me because I actually really like this card. One of my favourite decks, if you go and watch my Impenetrable Faith guide, that's probably, is that my favourite? It's one of my favourite builds at the minute with the Adepta Sororitas, and it's pretty powerful. And one of the reasons it's really powerful is it does revolve around this card, where I basically make a Vanguard invulnerable, and that's kind of like nothing your opponent can do for a turn. The only thing is that it is situational. I really thought about the description of 3 stars here. Like, it can be incredibly good, but in certain situations, right? So there are many turns where this card will just sit in your hand and you're not ready to use it, and that's not good. So I think overall 3 stars is about right. It has a very powerful ceiling, but you will only get to use it situationally. The Blade of Faith, another interesting one. I've got to be honest, I've not used this card that much. I really do think that dealing 3 damage for 3 is poor, and I don't know whether I want to include that in my 3 drops, like, because the problem with this card is you actually want this effect early in the game. I think, like, you want to be playing your 3 drops in the early game, right? And you're only ever going to be able to deal 3 damage at that stage. I actually obviously think that once you've got the 5 faith, this is incredibly powerful, right? The value that you're getting of doing 6 damage for 3 energy is really quite OP, but there's quite a bit you've got to do to get there, and also by the time you have got there, dealing 6 damage is not as meaningful as it would be early game. So I think overall I have to just say, yes, there are situations where this is a good card, but also there are situations where it's not. So I do think 3 stars is about right. Trial of Suffering, this is a weird card, because the reason I've given this a 3 is I look at this card, you know, and it says the fact that I can just sort of give 1 armor. If I've got faith, I can give 2 armor, and I just think it seems really good on paper, but I have not found a deck that works. But again, if we were to sort out the Celestian Superior, the Immolator, the Exorcist, these big units, I could well see this card becoming a lot better. A lot better. So I'm going to say situational at the minute. I could honestly say right now that this card, this was a hard one, because I could almost put it from unplayable. I could say it's bad. I could say it's situational. I could say it's good. I think at the minute I'm going to say 3 stars is feels about right, but this is one that could definitely change depending on how things go in the next kind of like buff or nerf round. The Beacon of Faith is also pretty good, but again, you know, if we get that faith buff off, giving +1/+1, that includes the Warlord, which is really nice. And it is give 2 health to all units, right? So it's not just heal. It actually gives 2 health again to units, can go above the starting health. The Warlord gets that buff. It's pretty good, and it only costs 2 energy, so it's pretty good. But again, there are situations where you're sitting there and you kind of have this in hand. You don't have a particularly great board, and you wish you had a nice unit to develop the board, and you've got this, and it does nothing. So overall, I'm kind of giving it a 3. Now, the Paragon Warsuit, I think it's been a little bit bugged. Let me know in the comments what your experience of that is. I do think right now that I was a bit down on this card, and then I kind of like got a little bit, I'm kind of like, tried it in a few decks, and it's been a bit better than I thought. The main reason why this is a 3 and not a 2 is that we don't have many cards that are payoff, what I call payoff cards at the minute, where we've accumulated all this faith, or we've got all this faith building stuff in our deck, things like the Relic of St. Catherine, for example. and there's no payoff for it. So I think the Paragon Warsuit, what that does is it just gives us a payoff for faith, right? Like we can play this and then play the relics afterwards, or play your Shrine World afterwards and things like that. So I think the Paragon Warsuit, it just is like one card in the faction that is late game and actually pays off for faith, and there's not many of those at the minute. So in that sense it's decent, but it's not world beating at all, but pretty nice stats and everything. The armor's pretty nice. If you've got the 6 faith and it gets the Vanguard, it's much better. It's quite high at the minute to get 6th faith, but I think it's doable. Now, the Penitent Engine is one of these cards where, when I first started building decks, I would have probably had this in S tier, because having another flanking unit in the Morin deck, for example, in the Penitence decks, is really powerful. The only problem is, you know, and some of the community have said a similar thing, is that you do tend to feel the low damage stats of this card. So, yeah, you do tend to get really so you ping it with Morrowind, right, and then it can obviously flank. Now it does get Blast 2, so that's something that's pretty unique and pretty cool. However, I would say that having only 4 or 5, well, it's usually going to be 5 that you go with to trade, it's slightly under par at 6 energy. It reminds me of the flying flanker in the Space Marines. So I do think you'll find that you have certain trades you want to make with this at this point in the game, and you're kind of short. And because you can't attack with your Warlord, because you had to use the prey to ping this to give it flank in the first place, you have no way of finishing it off. Whereas with the Space Marine flanker, you could still use that Calgar or whatever to finish off a unit. So it's not quite as powerful as I first thought, but it's still a good unit, and I think you definitely still play it in Penitence decks. Next up, we've got the Celestian Sacrosanct, which is a good card. I obviously have had games where I play this and it just kind of gets killed where it gets traded on the ranged attack, and when you're playing into decks that can do that, then obviously you're not getting great value for the 6 energy. But then you have other games where having a big, beefy, you know, armored Vanguard is really great. It can prey itself, it can allow your other units to get praise off, so I think it's decent. I definitely think this is a card that you should be trying in some of your decks, particularly some of your kind of mid-range or control decks. And yeah, overall, kind of happy with where this card is. The Missionary is a weird card because, you know, having only 4 health and 2 range, it can be a really bad card, but I think this is one of those cards where it reminds me a bit like the Firesight Marksman from Tau, in that if you've got the advantage, if you're going first and you're the one with tempo and you're being proactive onto the board, then this can be a really good... So for example, if the board's clear and you drop this on 4, your opponent's only got the their Warlord, that they're requiring like a flanker or a stratagem, which of course if they use a stratagem, they're not developing their board. So the Missionary kind of has this... It kind of helps. It's kind of pretty good in a weird way when you're on the kind of draw and when you're going first. But if you're reacting, it's really bad. So that's why I've put it as ultimately as situational. I can't decide whether it should stick as 3 stars or go down to 2 stars. Let me know in the comments what you think. But actually, like I said, when you're on the draw, I think it's pretty powerful. So a pretty powerful card. So I'd say overall 3 stars. The Simulacrum Bearer, I actually missed this card when I did my original review. I would say that this card is it's okay. The problem with this card is it does not scale well. It's pretty useless when you draw it late in the game. If you get to play this on E3, which is essentially the second turn, then it's generally pretty good, because 2/2 is enough to combine with your Lord or whatever. It's enough to trade effectively if you need it in the early few turns. And it is a nice card with the 5 health, obviously, for essentially kind of helping you to pray and gain faith. But I'm not loving it as much as I thought I would, if I'm honest. It doesn't scale very well, and the pray to give +1 melee is quite nice, but it's a bit slow, and obviously that only works later in the game, by which point it's a lot easier to take out. Now the Celestian on the other hand is really good. Again, this particular card art's outdated. It's actually got 4 health now, not 3. And this has now become my 3 drop of choice for the faction. I do think that the 3 energy cards are the weakest. One of the weakest in the curve for about, I was going to say sisters again, but Adepta Sororitas. But I do think the Celestian, I've come to the opinion that this is probably the best one. So obviously it can be bad because it can just get traded off. You play this on 3, your opponent plays a 4 energy flanker with melee attack, and it just kills this easily, and you're kind of quite behind on the board. But equally, there are times where this can go off and just really be powerful, like when you... And the 4 energy does help. You know, if you think about Erica praying onto the Celestian, that means this card's coming down with 5 health. And 5 health is... There's a good chance it survives with that, so I do quite like her in the Erica deck. And the Battle Sister Gunner is a card that I kind of started out thinking this is really good, this card, and I do love the fact that when you pray you can still trade because it's giving you 2 damage, and I think for that reason it isn't a bad card. It's one of the early praying units that is better than that, but I wouldn't give it more than 3 because you're still talking about a 3 health unit that can easily be taken out and it doesn't trade too well. So I don't know. I think it's 3 stars at best, to be honest. Okay, so next up in the 4 stars. Remember, these are the good cards. These are the ones you want to be definitely looking to include in most of your decks. I think first of all, Morvenval, the Warlord herself, falls in here. I'm not sure whether she's quite a 5-star Warlord. Her secondary ability, her talent is kind of very situational. Can be nice, but it's not a permanent buff to stats. The Righteous ability, it just gives +1 melee, +1 range for 1 turn. The deal 1 damage is very good though. It's a very nice prey ability, and she's the one with 40 health. So obviously, if you want to run the Penitence deck, she's the Warlord to have, and she's pretty good at that. Saint Celestine is a solid card. You know, it's solid stats. It's a flyer with 7/7/7. You can't complain about that. It does nothing on the turn it comes down, but it does come obviously with the invulnerable until starting next turn, so your opponent can't do anything to this. And when I say invulnerable, it can't be harmed by things like no mucking about. It can't be harmed by anything. So that's quite a powerful effect, but it doesn't necessarily impact the board. It just helps you to sort of stick. But she is pretty powerful, and she also does have regeneration too. So even the next turn when you do then trade, if she falls down to say 2 or 3 health, the regen then puts her back up. She's pretty sticky, and she's not a bad target for the Rite of Restoration as well, which allows you to bring a unit back to life. I think the Zephyrim is a really, really solid flanker. It's got the nice 6 melee damage, and being a flyer, that means you can kind of really destroy enemy flyers with this. It's just really reliable. I think you need to play 2 of these probably in every single deck. Now the Ephrail Stern, again the card art's not up to date on this, but it's supposed to do 2 to 3 damage. I actually think this card might be a bit bugged at the time of recording this because I think it only does 2 damage. I've never seen it do 3 damage, and I've asked people in the community and they've said the same. So EG, if you're listening, good to check the code on that one. But either way, this card has really grown on me. Playing this card proactively on 6E with Camouflage, where your opponent is really struggling all of a sudden. If I'm playing Erica, I can give this thing 7 health, and that means that Stern is pretty sticky actually, and I have had some games where she has survived multiple turns, so Camouflage is a great ability. And of course, when she is praying, dealing 2 damage is actually really it's a really great ability. It gives extra faith if you destroy something. And what makes it great in Erica in particular is that if Erica's got up to 3 faith points, you can combine Stern's ability with your Warlord talent, which basically means you can do 5 damage to a unit every turn without swinging. So that's great because you're keeping up with trading on the board and you're generating faith. Solid card. Speaking of solid cards, I think Dogmata's really solid. I think these are really good stats. Obviously, the 3 range is a little bit of a weakness, but it's not. There's a big difference between 2 and 3. I think 3's it's not that bad. Given that she does have a rally ability and dealing 1 damage, it might seem small, but it's actually often a big deal. You know, it's the difference between your Warlord being 2 2 damage or 3, so it can often really help you to finish units off. And of course, it's a guaranteed faith point if you want to hit one of your own units. Obviously has synergy with Penitence decks. It's one of those cards where it's like a 6-drop that she actually thinks she could work in any Warlord, and she could bring different abilities to all 3. She's not the best 6-drop in the faction, but she's just pretty solid. Like, and I never feel bad playing her. Like, having her always sort of feels good. So for me, the Dogma, I'm quite high on this card. I know some people would probably have her in a 3-star rating, but for me, I think 4. I think the 7 health's nice. I think the 7 melee. And by the way, the 7 melee, I mean, I've had this with various buffs. I've had this up to like 10, and she can really put some pressure on the opponent Warlord, so they kind of need to deal with this, which means they're not dealing with other stuff. Next up, I've got the Dominion Superior. Now, the Dominion Superior is probably the best 5-drop in the faction right now. Really reliable card. Only 2 faith to get the payoff, which is quite easy to achieve, and then dealing those 2 points of damage is great. And again, I love this card in Erika because the combination with the Warlord talent means you can do 5 damage per turn. So yeah, I mean, I don't know. I just think that Dominion Superior is just a really kind of reliable card. Never particularly feels bad. Retributor is another card I really love now. Now they've kind of made this change where it basically does 3 damage, not to a random enemy, but to a random enemy troop. That's the change that the buff made, and that means that this is much more reliable in dealing with, you know, when you're trying to trade. Now, the biggest downside to Retributor is that it does require 3 faith, and if you have her on turn 3, you might not have accumulated enough faith to play this on tempo, to play it on E4. You might not have enough faith to get that trade, and that's where it can be a bit awkward. But outside of that particular challenge, it's a very, very solid card. It's quite a powerful rally effect for 4E, so yeah, I love that card. Seraphine, also very, very good now. Having flank as standard makes a lot more sense, and even if you don't get the faith buff, it's a good card. If you do get the faith buff, which you need to have 3 faith, it will basically give +1 to the range attack and +1 to the health, which makes it a superb 4-drop flanker. Yeah, really good card in most of my decks. Dialogus also got buffed. It now actually has a 3/3 in its stats, and give Vanguard to a friendly troop, including itself, is really powerful. I think it has a great ability. I think it has pretty nice stats. It does suffer a little bit in the later game in terms of like, can the stats really, are the stats really effective for trading in the later game? But it's quite a nice one to just drop on curve on E4. The Preacher is a card that is a 2-drop that does scale really well, and the same can be said for Crusader. So what I mean is, if you play it on E2, it's great. If you play it on E8, it's still great. The Preacher scales because once you've got 5 faith, it can actually have shield, and it also has a generative effect where it can either draw us cards or gain us faith or put more Crusaders down. So depending on the phase in the game that you're in, all of those can be useful in different ways. Really, really strong card. You want to have the Preacher for sure. And I also have come to realise that I think the Crusader is a very good card, and actually a card that is worth running in your decks. Like, I think when I first reviewed the cards, I said I would probably never run the Crusader. I'd just look to get them for free off the Crusader or off the Missionary. But actually, I don't think that's true now. I think Crusader is really good. I think you can play it on the first turn of the game without the faith buff, and it gives your Warlord a chance to pray and not receive any damage back. Obviously Crusader scales really well because in the late game, if you've got 3 faith, then it gets the extra armor buff and it becomes a fantastic Vanguard just for 2 energy. Also, the Relic of St. Catherine received a buff. It no longer is 5 energy, as the art says here. It now only costs 4, and for 4 energy I think it's about perfect. So for 4 energy we obviously just gained 4 faith. Opponent can't do anything about it, and obviously we fall behind on tempo, but you build your deck in a way where you're gonna get that back now, because you're gonna start generating the benefits of having extra faith. So really like the Relic St. Catherine. I now think it's a good card. I don't think it was at 5 energy, but I think at 4 energy it's about right. Okay, so my must-haves, the Divine Intervention first of all. What can we say about this card, guys? The reason why this card is so good, even though it has an 8 faith payoff for its its kind of top tier ability, is that its baseline ability is really good. Right? That's what makes this card very good. Right? For 5 energy, destroy it's kind of like it says destroy the enemy with the highest attack. So it's kind of like the in between the Space Marine hard removal and the Orkz no mucking about, because it basically means that you know, like the no mucking about, like we can get round kind of stealth and camouflage and things like that. So it is better than the Space Marine one. And generally speaking, we want to kill the thing with the highest attack anyway. So I do think that its base ability is better than the ultramarine hard removal that also costs 5. This is why this is S tier, because then it has this ridiculously powerful game-winning win con for you, which is if you've got 8 faith, destroy all enemy troops. Not destroy your own troops like the Will of God, just destroy the enemy board. It's fantastic. So, like, it's a win-win card, and I think the key really when you're playing it is just to be disciplined enough to say, you know, don't always play for the pipe dream, just know when to kind of play it to destroy one troop. Now, the Spirit of Martyr is also, I think, an S tier card. Now, the only thing with this card is, like, and I don't know this for sure, but you might make an argument that you'd only play it in the Morven Val decks. But my god, it's powerful when you do. Like, really powerful. Like, the combos you can do. It basically gives you an AoE clear. It basically gives you a board clear if you use it well. Now, it's hard. It's not an easy card to play because it requires clever setup. But just because it's not easy doesn't mean it's not powerful. It's very powerful. And has all sorts of wonderful synergies in a Penitence deck. Now, I would say that outside the Penitence deck, it's still also pretty good. I'd probably say it's like a 5-star in a Morven Val deck, and maybe a 4-star in the other Warlords, to be honest. But I still think it's good, even in those. Now, the Hallowed Martyrs just has a really powerful effect. It really persuades your opponent to not attack your face, right? Because they're going to start losing the board. I was tempted to put this down because I really hate the synergy in the mirror match at the minute, where your opponent can just basically play the 7-drop, the Mortifier, and then essentially it's like the Hallowed Martyrs just backfires on you. It's a silly interaction, and I don't know what's going to happen there. Something needs to change so that shouldn't exist in the game. But like I say, I almost marked it down for that. But it's one interaction in the game, and I think if you just ignore that and look at the rest of the game, the Hallowed Martyrs is a very strong, continuous ability to have on. Speaking of strong abilities, Cleansing Flame is just a really solid AoE card for only 4 energy, cheap. It does 3 damage to 3 adjacent units. It's consistent, it's reliable, and it's effective and powerful. So I think Cleansing Flames is a top tier card. And now that they've fixed the Rite of Restoration, I also think that this is a top tier card. Again, the artwork's not updated here, but what this now allows us to do is to choose a friendly troop that died, not just this turn, but also in your opponent's previous opponent's turn. So that makes a huge difference, because it's obviously in your opponent's turn where they're going to kill a unit, and that's where you can kind of get the unit to stand back up. So that could be a Stern, it could be a flanker like Zephyrin, so they can come back, stand back up and flank again, or it could be something like Saint Celestine, who stands back up and has invulnerable again. So there's so many good targets for the Rite of Restoration, including even like the Exorcist. You know, if the Exorcist does have the faith buff on, if it dies and you bring it back with this, it does the AoE damage again. Erica is must-have. Erica is bordering on my favourite Warlord in the game. As I say, there are some cards around her that need improving, I think, to make the faction, just to get the faction where I'm hoping it will be. But I really find Erica's playstyle a lot of fun. I really enjoy being able to give units +1 health that goes beyond the starting health, and kind of ask that question of your opponent: can you get rid of that unit? You know. So I really like Erica, and I also think that her righteous talent, Fury of the Righteousness is awesome, because it's like you've got to get the 3 faith, so it's a bit rubbish to start with early game, but then once you've got it, like, always having a damage ability is just ace. Like, you can really turn the corner and start becoming the beatdown with it, or it helps you to control the board. Absolutely love it. Prayer is also a must-have S tier card. It's one of the best ways to generate faith in the early game, right? You just pray with your warlord and then you stick prayer on it straight away, like first turn for example, and now your opponent's warlord can hit you in the face, but then the shield takes the damage and so you get the faith point. So prayer, prayer is really powerful, and combined with the defensive stratagem, you can easily have 3 faith after the first turn with that combo. Devout Warriors is also the S tier when it comes to drawing. Again, getting 3 faith is not that hard nowadays. And also the fact that you don't need to play Devout Warriors early, you probably throw this back from your mulligan. So by the time it comes around to playing it, you will have the 3 faith. That's what I love about this card. It's like you don't need it at the time when you're not going to have the faith. So you need it in the later game, and then for only 1 energy to draw 2 cards is super, super efficient. I love that. The Mortifier is also a really great card. Took me a while to come around to it. At the end of the day, it's got fantastic stats for 7 energy. Every single time this thing takes any damage, it deals 2 damage to the enemy warlord. So it has basically the effect of being able to threaten the enemy warlord, to be able to close games out. And you need cards like that when you're playing against the likes of Imatech, that can drag games out forever. You need cards that can do that. So Mortifier is a really powerful card. There are some of the stratagems we talked about earlier that could really synergize well with Mortifier. Speaking of awesome cards, Ace Dread is just fantastic. Like, obviously you're going to have games where you drop her and your opponent's going to do everything to remove her. And they will, and they often will. But it's just a fantastic card, like super powerful. Your Warlord prays, it gains shield. It's almost like what we just said about prayer. So it helps you to guarantee faith. And if she gets to pray, or other units get to pray as well, well, you just run away with the game. It's a very powerful card, and even just in terms of trading on 5, on tempo, on curve, it's got great stats, and Erica can make it 7 health again. Amalia is one of my favourite legendaries in the game. I absolutely love this idea that, she has a baseline of not really doing too much, but pretty well statted, especially if you were to play her out on 3E, if you needed her to play a tempo, but my god, it's satisfying when you've just spent the game building up faith, and she comes down late game and does 9 damage. It's great. It's basically hard removal on a stick, and we don't have much of that in the game, and I want to see more of that, because it allows you to kind of... It's S tier because it allows you to swing the game. Usually what happens is, you have to, when you want to use removal, like a stratagem, like if we play Divine Intervention, for example, it's baseline. We've spent 5 energy, we've killed your big powerful unit, but we haven't developed the board, so our opponent still gets to kind of then take the board back by deploying again. Whereas with Amalia, you remove something and you've developed the board, and that's a really rare thing in the game, and that's a really powerful mechanic when you're playing a game like Warpforge, which is very, very tempo orientated. And last but not least, I have the Arcoflagellant, which is also, by the way, I haven't ranked these in kind of like in order so don't read too much about the kind of left to right place. It's just all of those are 5 stars. That's the way I've done this. So I think the Arcoflagellant is not the best card in the entire faction, but I do think it's a 5-star card. I think for 2 energy, I think in this faction, with the amount of combos that you can do, this thing can be doing 3 AoE. Imagine a card that said deal 3 damage to the entire enemy board, or the entire board for 2 energy, and not to mention the fact that it can flank and do 2 damage before the AoE triggers happen anyway. So it's got tons of flexibility. It's got synergies with Spirit of the Martyr. It's got synergies with Mortifier and all sorts of other things. So overall, I think this card is a really, really great card, and definitely one of the better 2 cards in the faction. So there we have it, guys. That is my Adepta Sororitas tier list. Let me know in the comments anything that you agree with or disagree with, and yeah, like and subscribe, and I'll see you guys in the next one.